The first book of EMILE, or On Education, by Jean-Jacques Rousseau, begins with his remarks with the value of education for men. For a man left to himself from birth would be more of a monster than the rest. He gives an appeal to our mothers to take up the responsibility of educating children, similar to that of a plant being fashioned by cultivation. For when we are born into this world, we are weak, dull-witted, and heavily dependent on people around us. Education furnishes what we lack. We are taught how to eat, drink, walk, and talk. There are three masters of education given by Rousseau: the education of nature, of men, and of things. The education of nature is related to the inner growth of our organs and facilities. On the other hand, how we learn to make use of this growth is the education of men. And lastly, the education of things is the experience we gain through our interactions within our surroundings. And we are all taught by these three masters. There is a practice of sending babies to be nurtured by nurses during the time of Rousseau. This practice is frowned upon by Rousseau, for he believes that the nurses do not share the same love the parents have for the baby, and so they cannot raise the baby in the right manner. One ought to teach him to preserve himself as a man, and to bear the blows of fate, a phrase said by Rousseau. This statement tells us that to live is not to breathe, but to act, to make use of our organs, our facilities, of all the parts of ourselves, which gives us the sentiment of our existence. A child ought to be taught how to live, how to survive the cold and the harsh winters, to swim in the water, and so on. So, in the absence of the child's parents, he may be able to survive on his own. The man who has lived the most is not he who has counted most years, but he who has most felt life, as Rousseau said. In the early days or weeks and months of a newborn babe, it does not have the ability to speak properly. The baby do, however, have its own language, which is crying. This is the first language babies use. It is then the duty of a mother to tend to whatever the baby is crying for, to soothe and ease the pain and discomfort, not to beat nor shout at the baby. There ought to be freedom for a baby to move with ease, so instead of just wrapping the baby in tight clothing, it is best to place the baby in a big cradle, which is also well padded so that the baby can move easily and safely. This is to give the baby more freedom to move, to walk, to do and act, and so on. And lastly, the baby should be free to exercise as he should, as well as his organs as he can.
Good day, everyone. I'm here to discuss the book 2 of the second phase of a child's education, which is the infancy, in which a young children must emphasize the physical side of their education. They must be freed, thereby developing physical sense that will be the most important tool in their acquisition of knowledge. Then they should be taught manual trade, such as carpentry, further augmenting their physical capabilities and hand-brain coordination. This book, Jean-Jacques Rousseau wants to pursue the idea that a child should be independent from any other people. He should be freed and must be given that freedom in order to learn education on his or her own, only having the guidance of such parent or such person. At this stage, we let them cry, and when they need our attention, they stop crying. A child learn the meaning of signs by their effects. They have no other meaning for them, in such that when a child cries, we should let them cry, and he on his own or on her own should know that we will only come to them when they stop crying, so that we can be with them. And as such, if he gets hurt, let him be. This is the time for his first lesson of courage. The character Emile in the book should be acquainted by pain. To bear, it's the first and most useful lesson. As humans as we are, we have these foolish and pedantic methods wherein we prevent our children to learn on their own. But according to Jean-Jacques Rousseau, we are limiting our children to the right education that they need. With our pedantic and foolish methods, we might be jeopardizing the future of our child, since we are training him to be dependent on a certain person. But what we should do is that we let a child experience those emotions such as pains, sadness, joy, whatever it is. He or she on her own should learn that, and he or she on her own should be able to manifest those feelings in order to survive the future that is ahead of him. He should not be depending on any person. He should be learning on his own with only having that guidance of a parent or such a tutor. Because at the stage of puberty, the formal education starts. The private tutor, but Jean-Jacques Rousseau wants to have a private tutor, and the studying what he's only curious about. Because in this interesting fact that if he pursues what he is only curious about, this manner will educate himself, he will nurture a love of all things beautiful and learn not to suppress. The early adolescence is the best time to begin such study, since after puberty, a young man is fully developing his physically yet uncompelled personal being, and this only should be guided by a tutor, and his reasoning develops as such that he or she is learning on his own without being spoon-fed. This book shows us that in an early stage, a child should be freed from his limitations.
Book 3, Rational Stage, from 12 to about 15 years of age, which reason starts to develop. This section describes the intellectual education when he is ready to learn and is interested in language, geography, history, and science. He will possess the inner direction necessary to learn. The whole course of man's life up to adolescence is a period of weakness. What is the cause of man's weakness? It is to be found in the disproportion between his strength and his desires. It is our passions that make us weak, for our natural strength is not enough for their satisfaction. About 12 to 13, the child's strength increases far more rapidly than his needs. The strongest and fiercest of the passion is still unknown. His physical development is still imperfect and seems to await the call of the will. Practically, manly strength appears only with manhood. The vital spirits distilled in their proper vessels and spreading through the whole body can alone make the muscles firm, sensitive, tense, and springy, can alone cause real strength. It is not merely a question of bodily strength, but more especially of strength of mind, which reinforces and directs the bodily strength. Man has better strength and capacity. He will strive to use it in tasks which will help at need. Man is capable of preserving of what he knew and at the same time applying it. Our desire for happiness is inborn, and as it can never be fully satisfied, we are always seeking ways to increase what we have. This first principle of curiosity is natural to the heart of man, but is developed only in proportion to our passions and to our advance in knowledge. Rousseau said, "Ask him questions that he can comprehend, and let him solve them. Let him know a thing because he has found it out for himself, and not because you have told him of it. Let him not learn science, but discover it for himself." Rousseau also recognizes the value of sensible experiences. In this stage, the child does not clearly know the reason how the sun passes from its setting to its rising. At least he does know how it travels from its rising to its setting. His eyes alone teach him this. The child will slowly know things with its observation and constant motion, as the observable daily motion of the sun on earth. With this, the child may be interested on what is going on beyond this event, and maybe he will eventually awaken a desire to know the planets and to watch the constellations. Never show a representation of a thing unless it be possible to show the thing itself, for the sign absorbs the child's attention and makes him lose sight of the thing signified. Bear in mind always that the life and soul of my system is not to teach the child many things, but to allow only correct and clear ideas to enter his mind. I do not care if he knows nothing, so long as he is not mistaken. It is like loving and studying sciences. Your observations and experiments are not always precise. You may also consider errors. What matters most is what knowledge we can gain from it.
In the Book 4 of EMILE, we are introduced into the social stage. Herein, Rousseau introduces his teenage self. Emile, or the child, is now physically strong and learns to critically examine the world around him. He is now ready for the last stage of education, the social stage. As quoted, "We have made an active and thinking being. It remains for us, in order to complete the man, only to make a loving and feeling being. That is to say, to perfect reason by sentiment. The child, now in his adolescent stage, is finally brought into the world and socialized with other sentient beings. The tutor must keep the student focused on developing his practical skills. Two concepts are here, the two primitive sentiments. The first, amor de soi, or the natural self-love of a man for his own existence, and the pity, or pity, the natural and the tendency to hate seeing other sentient beings suffer. A person develops these sentiments, expands, changes, and progresses, and it depends on his environment. Self-preservation of a child is upheld and must remain pure and innocent to emphasize amor de soi. Malformation, which is vanity, is hateful and should be avoided. This is called amor propre, or the self-love of a man in comparison with others. Social interaction adds to the experience of a child and thus adds to his knowledge. The book 4 also introduces the creed of the Savoyard priest. Here, the child is now ready even for religious education. Accordingly, the Savoyard priest encouraged Emile and he took care of him in his turbulent and downtrodden moments. The priest was able to train him to be self-reliant and compassionate. It was said, the priest believed that natural religion does not necessitate blind obedience to religious authorities. This means that the children are in no way required to learn or imbibe doctrines and catechisms that they cannot comprehend. Religion comes to a child naturally and is not imposed. One should approach religion as a skeptic and thinking free, and discover God by his own discovery of it, and not through dogmas. The last book, Book 5. Emile here now is in his late teens, and the task now remaining is to provide a suitable companion for him, a wife. Rousseau starts his description of Sophie, Emile's wife-to-be, which is to him is an ideal woman. Between men and women, Rousseau believes that everything men and women have in common belongs to the species, and everything which distinguishes them belongs to the sex. He finds women and men to possess similarities in physiology. However, the sexual differences not only is evident in the body, but in the mind as well. A companion of one another, the couple, the man should be strong and active, and the woman should be weak and passive. In time of courtship, the woman is able to unleash the strength of a man by her resistance, and thereby dominating him. This appropriately is possible because of the shame and modesty with which nature has armed the weak for the conquest of the strong. For Rousseau, a woman is made especially to please man. However, man ought to please her in turn, but still, man possesses the dominance in the function. This chapter also elaborates on the education of female. This was a reflection of the time period of Rousseau where women's education primarily and traditionally focused on domestic skills like sewing, cooking, and housekeeping, which were clearly an ideal and encouraged state for a suitable companionship with a man. This is how Rousseau viewed how women should be educated, preparing them for their ultimate role with a man in society. Emile and Sophie's meeting was encouraged and arranged by the tutor and parents, which led to romance and an excellent pairing. But the tutor continued to utilize his knowledge and effort on managing the strong passions and keep Emile on the right track. This led to Emile leaving Sophie for 2 years of traveling and self-reflection. During this time, Emile has still more to learn regarding himself and the society. This chapter also introduces in minute details Rousseau's theory of social contract. This book concludes with Emile's reunion and marriage to Sophie. By this time, Emile vows to let his future children, be educated with as much care as his own tutor had given him. Jean-Jacques Rousseau's work outlines the principles and stages of child development that resonates with researchers at present. Although Rousseau's view the role of women as submissive to men, and these have since, in Rousseau's time, garnered strong reactions up until now, his arguments on how young men must grow up and develop to be self-reliant and compassionate is still essential. Men must grow, not to be manipulative and greedy. In giving this treatise on education, Rousseau offered a framework for the type of good citizen a social person could be in his time period.